During the very first week of my long-awaited retirement, I thought I had finally earned the right to breathe freely. No more alarm clocks screaming at dawn, no more aching bones after long shifts, no more endless sacrifices. Yet instead of congratulations, the words I received from my own son cut deeper than any blade. We don't need another mouth to feed in this house. With those cruel words, Christopher, the boy I had raised, educated, and provided for, handed me a job as a cleaner, as if my decades of hard work had been erased in a single instant. I smiled, I nodded. Outwardly, I played the role of the resigned old man, hiding my storm of anger behind calm acceptance. But inside, a quiet fire was already spreading, slow and merciless. He thought he had caged me, reduced me to nothing more than a burden. But when I didn't show up for that humiliating job, he began to realize the truth: he had underestimated me. And from that moment on, his life would never be the same again. Before I continue, please subscribe to the channel and share in the comments where you're listening from. It always warms my heart to know who's out there. Now let me take you back to that night, the night my world shifted. That evening, I sat down at the dinner table, my heart light and full of hope. Today was a milestone, my very last day at work. After 40 years of service, I had finally retired. I announced it with a proud smile, waiting for joy to ripple across the table, for glasses to clink in a simple celebration of my life's labor. Instead, my words froze the room. The fork slipped from Christopher's hand, clattering against the plate with a sharp metallic sound. Lily's eyes widened, her lips parting into a stunned, silent O. For a few long seconds, no one spoke. The silence grew thick, stretching across the cramped kitchen like a canyon separating me from them. Finally, Christopher broke the silence. His face flushed red, his voice rising with disbelief. "What, Dad? You can't just quit your job like that. Did you even think about what this means?" My smile faltered, but I held my ground. "Of course I did," I replied. 40 years of service, son. I've earned this. I thought we could celebrate together." But before Christopher could respond, Lily's voice cut through the air, sharp and cold. "Celebrate, Chris? Your father thinks we're going to feed him for free." The warmth I'd carried with me from work, my pride, my anticipation of shared happiness, began to turn to ice. In my mind, I had pictured Christopher clapping me on the back, telling me how proud he was. I had imagined Lily smiling gently, maybe even raising her glass in acknowledgement of the years I had given not only to my job but to my family. Instead, I was met with something I had never seen before in my son's eyes: irritation. Annoyance, as if my existence itself was a burden. Christopher leaned forward, his voice now carrying the commanding tone he must have used at his office job. "Listen, Dad, I'm not keeping an extra mouth to feed. You need a job tomorrow. I don't care if it's flipping burgers or stocking shelves, but you're not going to sit around here living off my paycheck." Each word struck me like a hammer, pounding away the pride I had carried home. I looked at him, the boy whose childhood I had paid for, whose college education I had scraped together money for, whose wedding I had helped finance. And now this man looked back at me as though I were nothing more than a parasite. Lily nodded in approval, her tone as sharp as her husband's. "Douglas, you're 65, not 90. Plenty of people your age still work. My neighbor's father bags groceries at 73. You'll manage." I tried to speak, to remind them of what I had given, but Christopher's voice cut me off. "You thought wrong, Dad. Do you even know what it costs to keep this house? To feed you, to clothe you? I work 50 hours a week at Whitmore Industries just to keep everything afloat. Money doesn't grow on trees." The irony stung, though they couldn't see it, not yet. I stared down at my plate. The meatloaf Lily had made, once my favorite, now sat heavy and cold, unappetizing, beneath the harsh kitchen light. Everything about that moment felt warped, as though I were looking at my life through a cracked mirror, distorted and ugly. Finally, I forced myself to speak. My voice came out low, trembling, but steady enough to mask the storm inside. "You're right," I whispered. "I should have talked to you first." Christopher's expression softened slightly, mistaking my words for surrender. "Look, Dad, I'm not trying to be cruel, but reality is reality. We can't afford a freeloader." That word, dependent freeloader, echoed in my head like a curse. I nodded, playing the part they expected, the humbled, obedient father. "I'll think about what you've said," I replied. "Good," Lily said briskly as she gathered the plates. "The sooner the better." Moments later, they disappeared into the living room, leaving me alone at the table. The overhead light hummed faintly, casting my shadow long and lonely across the kitchen floor. And as I sat there staring at my untouched plate, one thought grew louder than the rest. They believed they had broken me. But they were wrong, so very wrong. I could hear the television spring to life in the living room, voices rising and falling in casual conversation. To anyone else, it would sound like a normal evening, a husband and wife unwinding after dinner. But to me, those sounds were unbearable. Just minutes ago in the same house at the same table, they had shattered 40 years of dreams, reducing my life's work to nothing more than a burden they were forced to carry. I stayed seated at the kitchen table long after they had left, staring at the empty chairs where my family had been. The ghost of their presence lingered, the clink of Lily's glass on the table, the red flush on Christopher's face as he raised his voice, the sharp edge of their words cutting deeper than any knife. The house settled around me with small creaks and sighs, its old bones shifting as night descended. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and the faint hum of a car passing by filtered through the thin walls. Ordinary sounds of an ordinary evening, but for me, nothing about this night was ordinary. Finally, with heavy limbs, I forced myself to stand. My hands moved automatically, clearing the remaining dishes from the table. Each plate, each fork felt heavier than it should, as though weighted down by the truth that now pressed on me after everything I had done. After all the sacrifices and years of service, my own son and his wife saw me as nothing more than an unwanted expense. I turned off the kitchen light, plunging the room into shadow, and walked slowly down the narrow hallway toward the small bedroom at the back of the house. The room they had offered me, not out of love, but out of reluctant obligation. Behind me, Christopher and Lily's laughter floated faintly from the living room, already moving on from the conversation that had gutted me. To them it was done, settled. But for me it was only the beginning. I entered my room and sat down on the edge of the narrow bed. The mattress sagged beneath my weight, familiar but uncomfortable. I didn't bother changing. Still fully clothed, I lay back and stared at the ceiling. Passing headlights painted restless shadows across the cracked plaster, weaving shifting patterns above me. The house was settling into its evening quiet, but my mind refused to follow. 40 years of faithful service. 4 decades of early mornings, aching muscles, and quiet perseverance. And for what to be called a freeloader by the son I had loved, supported, and sacrificed for. I turned my head toward the dresser, its surface cluttered with fading photographs. Christopher's graduation, his wedding day, family holidays filled with laughter and smiles. We looked happy in those pictures. Was it all an illusion? Had I fooled myself into believing we were a family that cared for each other, when in reality their affection had always been conditional? Through the thin wall that separated my room from theirs, voices began to drift. At first soft murmurs, but soon their tones grew clearer, sharper. "Can you believe he just announced it like that?" Christopher's voice, laced with irritation, carried easily through the drywall. I froze, suddenly alert, every muscle tense. They were talking about me. "He thinks he can just sit at home on my dime." Christopher continued, his tone rising in frustration. 40 years of work, so what? That doesn't give him the right to retire on my salary. The words slammed into me like physical blows. Lily's response came muffled but clear enough. "And what if he refuses to work? What if he just sits around watching television all day? Then we'll take his pension and put him in a nursing home. I've had enough of supporting dead weight." Dead weight. The phrase cut into me, colder than ice water pouring down my back. My fingers gripped the bedsheet so tightly my knuckles turned white. Lily's voice droned on, merciless. "He's been mooching off us for 2 years since your mom died. Free meals, no expenses, and now he doesn't even want to work. He's got nerves of steel." I closed my eyes and memories rushed forward. The checks I had written, $23,000 for Christopher's college education, $8,000 for his wedding, countless smaller amounts to help them through rough patches. They never once asked where the money came from, never once wondered what I had to give up to make it happen. And now here they were laughing at the idea that I might want peace in my old age. Christopher's voice rose again, thick with contempt. "The old man doesn't realize how expensive everything is now. Utilities, groceries, insurance. He still thinks it's 1950. Maybe we should give him a deadline," Lily suggested. "1 week to find work, or he's out." "Perfect," Christopher agreed, his tone chillingly casual. And if he complains, we'll remind him that beggars can't be choosers. Their laughter followed, light and cruel, seeping through the wall like poison. I lay there in silence, absorbing every word, every dismissive chuckle, every casual reference to my supposed uselessness. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to breathe slowly. They thought they were discussing my fate in secret, but their careless cruelty had revealed more than they intended. I was no beggar. I was no dead weight. And though they could not see it yet, they would. They would. These were the very people I had sacrificed for the family I had loved, without condition, without hesitation. And now, as the house slowly sank into silence, preparing itself for the night, I lay motionless in my bed, struggling to accept this new brutal reality. My son, my Christopher, the boy I once taught to ride a bicycle, steadying his handlebars while his skinny legs wobbled furiously. The boy whose scraped knees I had patched, whose childhood nightmares I had soothed with gentle words, and the promise that his father would always protect him. That boy now saw me as nothing more than a liability, an unwanted expense to be managed and discarded. A nursing home. The phrase repeated in my mind like the slow, merciless beat of a drum. Again and again it echoed, hammering against my chest. They had already planned my exile, already discussed my fate in hushed tones and cruel laughter. Take his pension, they'd said. That modest monthly check, the sum total of 4 decades of blood, sweat, and aching bones. Strip it from me, and then hide me away, tucked into a facility with other parents whose children had long since decided they were no longer worth the trouble. I thought of my colleagues, men and women, who had shared the grind of factory life with me. I remembered their retirements, the send-offs, the gold watches, the fishing trips funded by grateful children, the surprise celebrations at country clubs surrounded by family. Jim Morrison's kids had saved up to buy him a boat. Helen's family had thrown her a party, balloons and speeches, honoring her years of dedication. And me, after 40 years of sacrifice, after a lifetime of loyalty, I got threats. I got ultimatums delivered coldly over a dinner of meatloaf that was supposed to be my favorite. But as I lay there in the darkness, a strange shift began within me. Beneath the raw hurt and disbelief, something colder stirred, a slow, deliberate anger. It crept through my veins like ice water, chilling, yet sharpening me all at once. I hadn't felt this in years, perhaps decades, but it was there, undeniable. They thought they could play games with their father's future. They thought they could treat Douglas Cook as though he were some frail, helpless old man, an inconvenience to be managed, a burden to be controlled. They were wrong. Perhaps it was finally time they learned who Douglas Cook really was. I closed my eyes, though no sleep came. The silence of the house pressed in on me, no longer comforting, no longer peaceful. It was heavy now, heavy with unspoken truths, with all the sacrifices that had gone unrecognized, with decades of love that had been quietly taken for granted. 40 years of labor. I had worked tirelessly, scrimping and saving every spare dollar to build a future for Christopher. I remember the endless double shifts at the factory when he needed books for school. The weekend jobs I took when his college bills arrived in the mail. All those years of eating canned soup and stale bread so that my paycheck could be stretched to cover tuition at Oregon State University. I remembered the night the phone rang, Christopher's voice breaking with panic on the other end. Tuition had gone up again. He didn't know how he would manage. I'd told him not to worry. Your old man will figure it out, son, I'd promised. And I had. I traded sleep for his dreams, my comfort for his future. And never once did I complain. Then came his wedding day. Lily glowing in her white dress, Christopher beaming in his rented tuxedo. They had worried about costs, about how far their small budget would stretch. But they never knew that their modest wedding had quietly doubled in price because I had covered the difference quietly without fanfare. I had stood there smiling, watching them dance to music I had paid for, eating cake I had financed, celebrating a love story I had made possible. Through it all, I lived modestly, not because I had nothing, but because I had chosen to give everything. And now the boy who had once looked at me as his hero sat in the next room plotting my exile. In that quiet, as the house sank deeper into its nighttime stillness, I lay wide awake, hurt, betrayed, but with a new clarity sharpening in my chest. They thought I was powerless. They thought I had nothing left to give, nothing left to fight with. But they had forgotten one thing I had built, this family, piece by piece, sacrifice by sacrifice. And what I had built, I could also take away. The night passed without sleep, only plans. Let them believe what they wanted. Let them think I had lived paycheck to paycheck, scrimping and scraping my way through life. Let them assume that my modest meals, my worn clothes, my quiet way of living meant I had nothing. The truth, my real wealth had been growing quietly for decades, tucked away in accounts they had never once suspected. I had always believed it was better to be seen as generous than as wealthy. Better to be the father who gave freely than the man who flaunted what he had. My fingers traced the frayed edge of the bedsheet as my mind drifted back 25 years to a night that had changed everything. I thought about Leonard Whitmore back when his company was nothing more than a dream scrawled across notepads in a half-empty garage. He'd been desperate, hopeful, and brimming with vision. I had seen something in him, something worth believing in. $500,000 every cent I had saved disguised carefully as a loan to avoid unnecessary complications. We'd shaken hands under the dim light of that garage, two men making a bet on the future, with nothing but trust between us. That bet had paid off. Whitmore Industries now employed over 3,000 people across Oregon and Washington. Their factories hummed day and night, their products shipped across the country. And Christopher, my son, worked for the very company his father had helped build, cashing paychecks that were in part made possible by the man he now dismissed as deadweight. The irony was bitter, but it also fueled me. "All right, Christopher," I whispered into the darkness of my small room. "This game can be played by two sides." A photograph on my nightstand caught a sliver of streetlight filtering through the curtains. I turned my head toward it. Christopher, at 8 years old, gap-toothed and grinning, holding the worn baseball glove I had spent 2 months of overtime to afford. Back then, that smile had been worth every blister on my hands. That boy had grown into a man who now plotted to strip me of my pension and banish me to strangers in a nursing home. But Christopher had made one fatal miscalculation. He mistook kindness for weakness. He confused my generosity for desperation. He looked at my modest lifestyle and assumed it meant I was powerless. He was wrong. Tomorrow I decided I would surprise them both. I would agree to their demands, agree to find a job. Let them think they'd won. Let them smirk with self-satisfaction, convinced they had put me in my place. Meanwhile, I would position myself exactly where I needed to be. Because sometimes the best revenge wasn't swift, it was patient. And patience was something I had mastered. 65 years of working, waiting, and sacrificing had taught me how to bide my time until the perfect moment. The glowing red digits of the alarm clock read 1:23 a.m. In just a few hours, the game would begin. In 6 hours, I would start teaching my son a lesson he would never forget: the difference between charity and vulnerability, between humility and humiliation. He wanted to see his father humbled. Very well, I would give him that illusion, right up until the moment he realized who was truly holding the cards. I pulled the blanket up to my chin and finally allowed my eyes to close. For the first time in days, sleep came easily. Tomorrow held new possibilities, and I intended to be well rested when I set them into motion. Morning light spilled into the kitchen, carrying with it the smell of freshly brewed coffee. The day had begun calm and ordinary, as if the previous night's cruelty had never happened. Christopher stood by the counter in his weekend clothes, scrolling through his phone while sipping from a steaming mug. Lily, dressed neatly as always, was at the table buttering toast. The scrape of the knife across bread, the soft hum of the coffee maker. Everything felt domestic, deceptively normal. Then I stepped into the room. Both of them looked up immediately. Their eyes met mine with a mix of curiosity and the lingering sharpness of last night's hostility. I moved slowly, deliberately, settling into my usual chair at the table, as though nothing at all was out of place. "Christopher," I began, my voice calm, steady. "I've been thinking about your words." He froze mid-motion, the coffee cup halfway to his lips. Lily's knife halted, leaving a thick glob of butter suspended in mid-spread. "You're right," I said, simply letting the words hang in the air, like bait on a line. They had braced themselves for another argument, expecting me to beg for my retirement dreams, to cling stubbornly to the little dignity I had left. The tension in the room was thick, both of them, armed with rehearsed phrases ready to cut down my protests. But when I spoke, their defenses faltered. "What would be the point?" I said, keeping my voice calm, steady, almost reasonable. "A man my age should contribute to the household. I see that now." Christopher blinked his suspicion plain as he slowly lowered his coffee mug onto the counter. His eyes narrowed, searching my face for signs of resistance. "You're not going to fight us on this," I met his gaze evenly, letting the silence stretch before I answered. "No, I understand." Across the table, Lily glanced at her husband, her expression flickering between disbelief and triumph. They had prepared for battle but were handed surrender instead. Victory without a fight. Christopher straightened, leaning against the counter, slipping into his manager persona as naturally as a man puts on a suit. His voice carried the tone of authority he so clearly relished. "Well, since you're being practical about this, I might have a solution. There's a janitor position open at my company, Whitmore Industries." A flicker of amusement tugged at the corner of my lips, a small smile I quickly smothered. The irony was exquisite. Christopher offering me a place at the very company I had once poured my savings into, a company I had quietly helped build from the ground up. "That sounds perfect," I replied smoothly, nodding with a calm that surprised even me. "I accept." The disbelief in Lily's voice was thinly veiled beneath a layer of satisfaction. "You're willing to clean offices?" I turned my eyes toward her and held her gaze without flinching. "Honest work is honest work," I said firmly. "When would I start?" Christopher's chest puffed with authority like a general assigning duties to a subordinate. "Monday morning, 7 a.m. sharp. You'd be ideal for the position. No complaints follows orders." He paused, savoring the moment, his lips curling ever so slightly before he delivered the sting. "The pay is minimum wage, of course, but beggars can't be choosers, right?" There it was again, that phrase they had tossed around so freely the night before, laughing, as though it were clever. The same words that had echoed through the thin walls into my small bedroom. I nodded solemnly, as though I had accepted both the job and the insult with equal grace. Christopher wasn't finished. "I'll need to speak with my boss, Leonard, about approving the hire. But I'm sure he'll understand the family situation. Probably feel sorry for you, actually." Leonard, my oldest friend, my business partner, the man whose garage I had once sat in 25 years ago, hashing out dreams and investments until dawn. The man who knew exactly how much of Whitmore Industries' foundation had been built on my quiet support. I kept my tone mild, carefully layered with gratitude. "That's very kind of you to help arrange this." Lily reached across the table and patted my hand, her gesture drenched in condescension. "See, this wasn't so difficult. You just needed to face reality about your situation. My situation. If only she knew. If only they both knew." I inclined my head, schooling my features into the expression of a humbled man. "I appreciate you both helping me understand. It'll be good to have purpose again, to contribute something meaningful to the family income." Christopher nodded approvingly, satisfaction softening his features. Exactly the attitude we wanted to see. Maybe this will work out after all. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone, his fingers already moving across the screen. I watched, calm and patient, as he prepared to call Leonard and secure my position as the newest janitor at Whitmore Industries. "I'll make the call this afternoon," Christopher said with finality. "Get everything set up for Monday." "Perfect," I replied, my voice warm with false gratitude. But inside, another picture unfurled, a vivid vision of my first day back at Whitmore Industries. A homecoming, yes, but not the kind Christopher imagined. Because this time, it wouldn't be me learning a lesson. It would be them. The conversation at the breakfast table drifted into trivial things: weekend errands, grocery lists, Lily mentioning the laundry. But my mind wasn't there. Their voices blurred together like background noise, while inside me gears were already turning sharp and deliberate. Monday morning was coming, and with it the lesson my son had unknowingly demanded. I was calculating the hours, the exact moment when their smug certainty would collapse into confusion. Very soon they would discover that underestimating Douglas Cook was the most expensive mistake they had ever made. Monday morning dawned crisp and bright, the kind of day that promised new beginnings. For Christopher, it was the start of a victory he thought he had secured. For me, it was the beginning of his undoing. The week leading up to this day had passed in a haze of his satisfaction. He strutted around the house, full of himself, boasting to Lily about how neatly he had solved his father problem. He'd told Leonard with pride that he'd found someone to fill the janitor position, someone who would be punctual, obedient, and grateful. He'd even gone so far as to purchase cleaning supplies for me, stacking them by the door, like trophies of his triumph. Every gesture was dripping with condescension. And through it all, I had played the perfect role. The thankful, weary old man nodding along with quiet appreciation, hiding the smile that threatened to give me away. By 7:30 a.m., I was seated in my kitchen, sipping my coffee, the morning paper spread out in front of me as if this were any ordinary day. Outside, the neighborhood stirred to life. Men and women hurried to work, children clambered onto buses, the world moved on in its steady rhythm, completely unaware that a private storm was about to break inside my family. The bag of cleaning supplies sat untouched by the door, a silent prop in the theater of expectations. Every time I glanced at it, I felt the corner of my lips twitch upward. He thought I'd carry that bag into Whitmore Industries like a badge of shame. He thought he was finally in control. At 8:15 sharp, the silence broke. My phone buzzed violently across the kitchen table. I let it ring a few seconds longer than necessary, savoring the anticipation before answering. "Dad, where are you?" Christopher's voice exploded through the line, sharp with fury and panic. "My boss just tore me apart." I tilted my head, affecting a confused frown he couldn't see. "Oh my. What's happened?" "Don't play games with me. Leonard was waiting for the new janitor. You were supposed to be there at 8. You never showed up." I drew in a breath, softened my voice, and let the words come out with careful frailty. What time was I supposed to be there again? His disbelief was almost tangible. 8 o'clock. We discussed this every day this week. How could you forget? I let a pause stretch long enough for his agitation to climb another notch. Then with gentle resignation, I said, "I'm so sorry, Christopher. At my age, well, sometimes things slip away. These old brains aren't what they used to be. This isn't about your brain." His voice cracked, rising another octave with sheer frustration. "I vouched for you. I told Leonard you'd be reliable, that hiring family was the smart move. And now I look like a complete fool. Perfect." In my mind's eye, I could see Leonard, my old friend, my business partner, sitting behind his polished desk, puzzled, perhaps even amused, as Christopher scrambled to justify why he was so invested in hiring an elderly janitor. Leonard, always polite, would never embarrass my son outright, but he'd be filing away every inconsistency. The irony of it nearly made me laugh aloud. "I feel terrible about this misunderstanding," I said, keeping my tone soft, contrite. "What did Mr. Whitmore say?" Christopher hissed into the phone, his words tight with humiliation. "He asked why I was personally involved in the hiring process. I had to tell him you were my father, living at home needing the work. The whole conversation was humiliating." Ah, so Leonard had stayed silent, choosing discretion over revelation. He hadn't exposed our connection even when pressed. Good man. That meant the stage was still mine to control. "Perhaps I could come in this afternoon," I suggested mildly, as though eager to make amends. "Make up for lost time, no," Christopher snapped. His panic was fraying into desperation. "Tomorrow. You will be at work at 7:45 a.m. sharp." Or else, he stopped, perhaps realizing the cruelty of what he was about to say. His voice softened a fraction. "Just don't let this happen again, Dad. My reputation is on the line." "Of course, son," I murmured, every syllable dripping with false earnestness. "I understand completely." When the call ended, I set the phone down gently on the table and leaned back in my chair. For the first time that morning, I allowed the smile to break free. Deep, unshakable satisfaction spread through me. Phase 1 had gone exactly as planned. Christopher was rattled, embarrassed before his boss, and already doubting the foundation of the authority he thought he held over me. The careful house of cards he had built was beginning to tremble, and I hadn't even left my kitchen. Tomorrow would bring Phase 2, the real turning point of this little game, and I still had several hours to sharpen the next surprise. But for now, I allowed myself the quiet triumph of Phase 1. Christopher had been shaken, rattled right where it hurt most, his pride, his fragile sense of authority. I'd reminded him without saying it outright that no matter how much he believed he was in control, a father always had the ability to shift the balance, to turn the game on its head. I folded the newspaper with deliberate care, the rustling sound oddly satisfying, like closing the chapter of a successful first act. Then, with the calm patience of a man who had played the long game before, I rose and made my way to my bedroom. On the small desk by the window, 2 manila folders lay waiting, silent, heavy, with secrets that had the power to blow everything wide open. Phase 3 would demand precision timing and preparation, but the groundwork was already in place. Christopher's angry call still echoed in my ears, his voice sharp, almost panicked, as he realized that not everything would go according to his carefully laid plans. That memory only strengthened my resolve as I sat down, slid the folders closer, and opened the one on the left. I remembered exactly when this trail of discovery had begun 2 months ago, on a gray January afternoon. The house had been quiet save for the faint hum of the heater. I'd walked into the kitchen and noticed Lily's coffee cup sitting on the counter, steam curling upward in lazy ribbons. Beside it were scattered sheets of paper, their letterheads immediately catching my eye. Henderson and Associates. At first glance, they appeared routine expense reports, invoices, the usual clutter of office paperwork. But to a man with 40 years of experience in budgets, audits, and financial oversight, nothing about those numbers looked routine. Office supplies, $847.50. Equipment maintenance, $134. My instincts sharpened in an instant. These were not just numbers, they were signals, and something about them smelled wrong. I'd spent a lifetime reading financial statements, and certain figures simply didn't fit. My eyes narrowed, scanning line after line. Inflated, padded, manipulated. Every digit whispered the same accusation. I picked up my phone quietly, ensuring Lily, who was in the next room on a call, couldn't hear the faint click as I photographed each page. Interesting, I had murmured under my breath that day, my tone caught somewhere between disbelief and grim amusement. Why would Lily bring these documents home? And why, of all things, would they reveal such obvious irregularities? That evening, I dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Michael Richardson, an old colleague, a forensic accountant with whom I'd shared more than a few late nights dissecting financial puzzles. He owed me a favor or two, and I intended to collect. Michael, I'd said casually, keeping my voice even, I need a quiet look into Henderson and Associates, specifically their office supply and maintenance expenses for the past 6 months. Discretion is essential. He understood immediately, and 3 days later his reply arrived, crisp, confidential, and devastating. The authentic expense reports told a very different story. The numbers Lily had left on my kitchen counter didn't match the truth. Not even close. $347 in actual supplies had been reported as $847. A $534 maintenance bill had magically ballooned to $1, $234. And it wasn't just a one-off mistake. This was a pattern, a deliberate scheme repeated month after month. 7 months to be exact. 7 months of quiet theft, each falsified receipt feeding her hidden bank account. Now at my desk, I spread the evidence out like pieces of a puzzle finally fitting together. On one side, Lily's falsified reports carelessly left where I could see them. On the other, the authentic records Michael had provided, precise and irrefutable. Side by side, they told a damning story. The neat handwriting, the altered figures, the steady siphoning of funds. It wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. I opened my laptop, fingers steady on the keyboard, and began to compose the email that would light the fuse. Dear Mr. Henderson, I typed each word, deliberate, heavy, with quiet authority. I am writing to inform you of serious financial irregularities in your company's expense reporting. Your employee Lily Cook has been systematically embezzling funds through falsified office supply and maintenance expenses. Please find attached documented evidence comparing reported expenses with actual vendor receipts. The pattern spans several months and represents substantial theft from your company. When I finished, I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the monitor casting long shadows across the room. Lily thought she had outsmarted everyone. Christopher thought he had tamed me, but neither of them understood just how patient, how thorough, and how dangerous Douglas Cook could be when pushed. The game wasn't just in motion, it was accelerating, and I held the pieces that could topple their carefully constructed world. I recommend immediate investigation and a full audit of all expense reports submitted by Mrs. Cook, a concerned party. I attached the scanned evidence files, carefully making sure every page was clear and legible, then double-checked the anonymous email account I had created weeks earlier for this very purpose. For several long seconds, my finger hovered over the send button, and in that pause, doubt crept in. I knew what would follow. Lily would almost certainly be fired, perhaps even prosecuted if the company pressed charges. Christopher would be forced to live under the crushing weight of his wife's disgrace, her unemployment, and the potential of a criminal trial. Their financial stability, everything they'd built on my generosity, would crumble like sand beneath a rising tide. But then just as quickly the doubt evaporated. I remembered their laughter echoing through the thin walls of this house, laughter that had not included me, but mocked me. I remembered the hushed, casual conversations about how soon they would put me in a nursing home, like I was already half dead, no longer worthy of respect or dignity. I remembered how they dismissed me, the very man who had funded their lives, paid for their comforts, and given them the stability they so easily took for granted. My hesitation vanished. With a decisive press of my finger, I clicked to send. The email disappeared silently into cyberspace, carrying with it the quiet but lethal destruction of Lily's career and the unraveling of Christopher's peace of mind. I sat back, exhaling slowly, as if I'd just signed an invisible contract. The wheels were now in motion. By this afternoon, perhaps even sooner, their world would begin to fracture from a direction they could never have anticipated. I closed the laptop and turned to the pile of physical documents stacked neatly beside me. Their purpose was finished. One by one, I fed them into the small paper shredder, listening to the satisfying whir as each page transformed into meaningless strips of paper. Evidence destroyed. Risk eliminated. Clean. Outside, spring sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, painting everything in a warm golden glow, as if the universe itself approved of what I had just done. I made myself a sandwich, simple bread, ham, and cheese, and sat down at the table. I chewed slowly, deliberately, waiting in calm patience. I knew the storm would come soon. Christopher thought he was playing games with his father's future, scheming to push me aside like a pawn he could sacrifice without a thought. But what he had failed to understand was that I had been quietly collecting insurance policies all along. Every move I made, every detail I noticed, every document I tucked away had been building toward this moment. The afternoon stretched before me like an untouched canvas, ready for the careful strokes of a master strategist. The morning's small victory, the humiliation Christopher had suffered before his boss, had been deeply satisfying. But it was only the opening gambit. Now came the methodical work, the long game, the kind of calculated maneuvering that separates a helpless old man from a seasoned strategist with 40 years of business experience. In my small study, sunlight fell across two neatly organized stacks of documents on my desk. On the left, photocopies of Henderson and Associates expense reports, captured secretly on my phone the night Lily left them carelessly on the kitchen counter. On the right, the authentic records Michael Richardson had discreetly secured through his network of professionals. Side by side, the comparison told a damning story of systematic theft spanning 8 months. I had to admit, Lily had been clever. Rather than stealing in bold, reckless amounts, she'd chosen precision, quietly inflating legitimate expenses by exact increments. A $347 office supply order magically became $847. A $1 $234 computer maintenance bill appeared as $1 $734, always just enough to skim profit without drawing suspicion. She'd even gone so far as to fabricate entire vendor relationships, submitting invoices for services that never existed. The total was staggering. My calculator showed nearly $18,000 siphoned into her personal accounts, money that had been silently funneled into her designer handbags, expensive jewelry, and those mysterious weekend shopping trips that always puzzled me, considering her modest salary. I opened my laptop once again, reviewing the message I had drafted. The tone had to be perfect, concerned, but professional, anonymous, yet credible. Enough detail to ignite suspicion, enough evidence to demand immediate action. I began typing, "Dear Mr. Henderson, I am writing to alert you to serious financial discrepancies within your accounting department. Your employee, Mrs. Lily Cook, has been systematically embezzling company funds through falsified expense reporting. The attached documents provide undeniable proof showing inflated invoices, fictional vendor payments, and personal purchases disguised as business expenses. The pattern spans January through August 2025, representing approximately $18,000 in theft." I leaned back in my chair, rereading every word, savoring the precision of it. It was perfect. Clear, factual, irrefutable. Lily thought she was untouchable. Christopher thought he was in control. Tomorrow they would learn just how wrong they both were. I recommend immediate internal audit of all expense reports submitted by Mrs. Cook, with special attention to office supplies, equipment maintenance, and consulting fees. Signed, a concerned observer. With deliberate precision, I attached the most damning pieces of evidence, scanned copies of Lily's falsified reports, alongside authentic vendor receipts, clear photographs of the incriminating documents I'd quietly captured from our own kitchen table, and a carefully constructed timeline that revealed step by step the slow escalation of her theft. Each attachment was a nail in the coffin of her career, 28 in total. My finger hovered over the send button. For a brief moment, hesitation crept in. Once this email left my inbox, there would be no turning back. Lily's carefully curated professional life would implode within hours. The respect she wielded at Henderson and Associates would evaporate like smoke, and with it her future. Criminal charges could very well follow. But then I heard her voice echoing in my memory, muffled but cruel, seeping through the thin walls of this house. Maybe we should give him a deadline. 1 week to find work or he's out. Her laughter followed, sharp and heartless. We can take his pension, stick him in a home, let strangers deal with him. That was all the reminder I needed. My hesitation dissolved. I pressed send. The email vanished into the digital ether, carrying with it a payload of carefully prepared destruction. 28 attachments, each one undeniable, each one a weapon sharpened over 2 long months of planning. By evening, perhaps even sooner, Lily Cook would be standing in the ruins of her career, facing the weight of her own lies. I exhaled slowly, closed the laptop, and turned to the small paper shredder tucked beneath my desk. One by one, the physical documents slid into the machine, shredded into ribbons, the final remnants of my preparation disappearing into nothingness. They had served their purpose. Now they had to be erased completely. Phase 3 was done. Phase 1 had humiliated Christopher at his workplace. Phase 2 had destroyed Lily's professional reputation. And Phase 3 would ensure that tonight when they returned home, they would face not the feeble, helpless old man they imagined, but the strategist who had orchestrated their downfall with surgical precision. I brewed a pot of tea and settled into my armchair, the late afternoon sunlight spilling golden warmth across the living room floor. I opened the evening paper, though my eyes hardly scanned the words. My mind was elsewhere, waiting for the storm I had unleashed to arrive at my doorstep. It didn't take long. At precisely 6:43 p.m., the front door slammed with a violence that rattled the picture frames on the wall. Rapid footsteps echoed across the hardwood floor, heels striking like gunshots. I lowered the newspaper, feigning surprise just as Lily appeared in the doorway. Her transformation was shocking. The polished, composed woman who strutted out every morning in tailored blouses and neat buns was gone. In her place stood someone broken. Her eyes were red and swollen mascara streaked down her cheeks. Her blouse was wrinkled hair spilling from its pins. Her hands trembled as she clutched her purse like a lifeline. "Lily, what happened?" I asked, rising halfway from my chair with an expression of practiced concern. My voice was gentle, but inside I was savoring every detail. Her answer tumbled out in fragments, broken by gasps and sobs. I'm facing termination. Someone sent my boss documents, financial records. They think I've been stealing." I widened my eyes, carefully shaping my face into disbelief. "Stealing? That's terrible. Who would accuse you of such a thing?" She collapsed into the armchair across from me, her purse falling to the floor with a dull thud. Her body seemed smaller, crushed beneath the weight of her fear. "I don't know," she whispered hoarsely. It was anonymous. But the evidence, they had everything, Doug. Bank records, expense reports, even photographs of documents. It was like some forensic investigation. I leaned back, slowly steepling my fingers, hiding the quiet satisfaction that burned behind my calm exterior. My tone was sympathetic, my eyes full of concern. "That sounds absolutely devastating. But what exactly are they claiming?" Her voice broke entirely as she confessed. "They're saying I inflated expense reports, created fake invoices, used the company card for personal things." Her breath hitched, and then the final blow. "Doug, they have dates, amounts, vendor names, everything. They know everything." Inside, I felt a surge of triumph so strong it nearly broke through my mask. Henderson had moved quickly, faster than even I anticipated. My email had detonated in her world within hours, ripping apart the careful facade she had built. And I sat across from her, the picture of sympathy, the concerned father-in-law, the man she thought weak and disposable. But tonight, as her empire collapsed, only one truth mattered. She would never suspect that the quiet old man in this chair had been the executioner all along. A competent businessman, clearly the kind who understood that embezzlement required swift and decisive action. Mr. Henderson had wasted no time. I could almost admire his efficiency. It was precisely the quality that had made his company thrive. But surely this is some kind of misunderstanding. I said, gently softening my tone, weaving just enough sympathy into my voice to sound convincing. You're an honest person, Lily. Anyone who knows you would vouch for your character. Her eyes, swollen and red from crying, lifted toward me with a mixture of hope and despair. That's just it, she whispered, her voice trembling. The evidence is so detailed, so specific. Whoever did this has been watching me for months. They documented everything, Doug. Every receipt, every inflated invoice. It's like they knew exactly where to look, exactly what to find. Indeed they did, I thought, silently fighting to suppress the smirk tugging at the corner of my lips. Aloud, I leaned forward, letting worry crease my brow. Have you told Christopher yet? Her face crumpled further, the fragile wall she had tried to build collapsing completely. No. How can I? He's already drowning in stress with his job, with the situation about you missing your first day. If I tell him now, it'll break him. Her voice cracked and she pressed a shaking hand to her forehead. Doug, what am I going to do? If they fire me, if there are criminal charges, we'll lose everything. Now, I murmured soothingly, rising slowly from my chair. I moved closer, placing a gentle grandfatherly hand on her trembling shoulder. We'll figure this out together. Family supports family, right? The irony almost made me laugh aloud. Here she was, the same woman who had laughed about locking me away in a nursing home, the same woman who mocked the years I had spent providing for her and Christopher, now clinging to me for comfort. They've suspended me, she said after a long, shuddering breath, her hands twisting a crumpled tissue, pending a full investigation. Mr. Henderson told me the evidence was too compelling to ignore. They're bringing in external auditors. They'll review every single transaction I've touched in the past year. External auditors. Perfect. Michael Richardson's meticulous records would slide seamlessly into place, validating every single accusation I had leveled against her. The trap had been sprung flawlessly. Is there any chance this could be resolved quietly? I asked, tilting my head, still maintaining the role of the concerned father-in-law. Perhaps if you spoke directly to Mr. Henderson, explain your side of things? My side, she cut me off, a bitter, humorless laugh escaping her lips. What side, Doug? The documents don't lie. Someone has built an airtight case against me, and I don't even know who or why. It's over. Her voice broke on the last word as if the admission itself had drained what little strength she had left. The sound of tires crunching over gravel cut through the thick atmosphere of despair. Both of us froze. Christopher's car, his familiar steady rhythm of footsteps, approached the porch. The metallic scrape of his key sliding into the lock echoed louder than it should have. Please, Lily whispered urgently, leaning toward me, her mascara-streaked face filled with desperation. Let me tell him myself. He's going to be devastated. I gave a slow, sympathetic nod and leaned back into my armchair, folding the newspaper neatly onto my lap, as though settling in for a performance. The door swung open. Lily, Dad, I'm home. Christopher's voice carried its usual mixture of weariness and frustration. The thud of his shoes echoed through the hallway until he appeared in the living room doorway, his tie loosened, shirt wrinkled, and his expression drained from a long day's burdens. But the moment he saw Lily, his demeanor transformed. Alarm sharpened his features as his eyes darted to her blotchy face and trembling hands. What did you do to her, old man? His briefcase hit the floor with a heavy thud. He rushed forward, dropping to Lily's side, his hand hovering protectively near her shoulder. I come home to find my wife crying, and you're sitting here like nothing's wrong, Christopher. I didn't do anything. I began calmly, my tone measured even as his glare burned into me. Don't lie to me. His voice rose, filling the room with thunder. First, you embarrassed me at work by not showing up, and now you've upset Lily somehow. What is wrong with you? Lily raised a shaking hand, her voice a desperate whisper. Chris, please. It's not your father. Then what is it? Christopher's voice thundered through the room, sharp and commanding, the same tone he probably used in boardrooms and with subordinates who feared disappointing him. He turned on Lily with a mix of authority and desperation, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Why are you crying? What happened? Tell me now. For a heartbeat, Lily just stared at him, her chest rising and falling rapidly, as though she were drowning and searching for air. Then, like a dam that could no longer hold her words, spilled out in a flood. They want to fire me, she cried, her voice breaking with anguish. Someone sent anonymous evidence to Mr. Henderson. They're saying I've been embezzling money. She choked on the word as if it poisoned her tongue. They've suspended me pending investigation. The room fell into a suffocating silence. Christopher froze mid-step, the color draining from his face so suddenly it was as though his very lifeblood had been stolen. He stared at her, unmoving, the world around him, collapsing brick by brick. Embezzling, he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of disbelief. Slowly, almost mechanically, he lowered himself into the nearest chair, his knees no longer able to bear his weight. That's impossible. You're the most honest person I know, Lily. The most trustworthy. That's what I told them. Lily sobbed, clutching her tissue until it shredded in her hand. But they wouldn't listen. Whoever sent this information, they knew exactly where to look. They had everything, expense reports, bank records, every last detail perfectly documented. It's like someone's been watching me, waiting for this moment. Christopher's face became a storm of emotions, each one striking in waves. First confusion, then denial, then a panic that tightened his chest and left him gasping. His whole world, his father missing work, his wife accused of theft. His reputation teetering was unraveling at a speed he couldn't control. This can't be happening, he muttered, fingers digging into his scalp as he dragged his hands through his hair. Not now. Not when everything else is already falling apart. Everything else, Lily asked, blinking at him momentarily, pulled from her own despair. Christopher's eyes flicked toward me, burning with unrestrained resentment. His words cut like glass. My father here decided to play games yesterday. Didn't show up for work after I vouched for him personally. Do you know how that made me look in front of my boss? Like a complete amateur, I explained it was just confusion about the time. I began softly, my voice calm, measured a deliberate contrast to his fury. No. Christopher snapped, his body jerking upright, his fingers stabbing the air toward me like a weapon. No more excuses, no more senior moments, no more tricks. Tomorrow you're coming to work with me. You're going to sit there, do your job, and prove you're not going to make me look like a fool again. I'll drive you there myself to make sure you show up. His face was red with fury, his breath ragged, his voice trembling with the brittle edge of desperation. Christopher, that's not necessary, I started, but he cut me off. No tricks, he shouted, his voice cracking, because I know you. I know what you're capable of. I've had it with both of you dragging me down, ruining everything. My reputation, my marriage, my entire life is under attack, and I'm not going to let it happen. The room quivered with the force of his breakdown. Lily sat stunned, her face caught between disbelief and despair, her crisis colliding with the revelation of just how fragile Christopher's own world had become. I met his blazing stare without flinching, my own calmness, like a dagger twisted into his rage. My voice was quiet but deliberate, each word carrying weight. Don't worry, son, I said, steady as stone. Today everything will be different. Something in my tone froze him mid-breath. For the briefest second, his chest heaved as he tried to decode my meaning. His posture faltered, the fire in his eyes dimming into wary confusion. It better be, he muttered finally, his voice dropping into a hoarse, threatening whisper. Because if it's not, if you embarrass me one more time, I swear I'll follow through on every promise I've made. I'll put you in a nursing home, strip your pension, and make sure you have nothing left. Do you understand me? Christopher's voice cracked like a whip across the room, filled with the venom of a man backed into a corner. His hands trembled, not from weakness, but from rage barely contained. I didn't flinch. I simply nodded, solemn and deliberate, concealing the small, knowing smile that tugged at the corners of my lips. a smile he couldn't see, a smile that would have terrified him had he known its meaning. "Yes, son," I said softly, my voice almost tender. "I understand." But inside I was already counting the hours. Tomorrow would indeed be different, far more different than Christopher could possibly imagine. The house fell into a tense silence, after that the kind of silence so heavy it pressed down on the chest. Three people under the same roof, each drowning in their own storm. Christopher fighting to keep his carefully curated reputation intact. Lily haunted by accusations that threatened her very freedom. And me, the quiet architect of chaos, watching them unravel without ever realizing that all their troubles came from the same root, the same hand guiding their downfall. That hand was mine. Morning arrived too soon for Christopher. His footsteps echoed through the hall like the march of a condemned man heading to his own trial. For him, the night had been an endless torment, hours of tossing, turning, replaying every worst-case scenario in his mind. For me, it had been blissfully peaceful. I'd slept deeply, almost luxuriously, because I knew the curtain was about to rise on the final act of the play I had so carefully orchestrated. When dawn light spilled through the blinds, I rose with a calm precision. I dressed methodically in the uniform he had bought me, each article of clothing, a costume for the greatest performance of my life. The janitor's work clothes were no longer fabric, but armor, preparing me for what was to come. Christopher was already in the kitchen when I arrived. He hunched over a mug of coffee, swallowing it in desperate gulps, as if caffeine alone could steady the storm raging inside him. His face told the story of his sleepless night, dark shadows beneath his eyes, stubble roughening his jaw, and that tight, brittle expression of a man who had decided to face his problems by sheer force of will. "Ready?" he asked, curt-clipped, not bothering with any trace of warmth. "Ready," I replied evenly, pulling the jacket snug across my shoulders, completing the look of a janitor reporting for duty. The drive to Whitmore Industries began in silence. For the first 10 minutes, the car was nothing but the low hum of the engine and the rhythmic whoosh of Portland's morning traffic. Christopher gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles blanched. White, his jaw clenched as though he were chewing on unspoken curses. He poured every ounce of his nervous energy into the road ahead, but the air between us was thick with unspoken tension. I sat quietly in the passenger seat, watching familiar neighborhoods roll by, counting down the minutes until the final piece of my plan would click into place. The city blurred past the window, but I saw it all with a strange clarity. Each streetlight, each passing car, each turn brought us closer to the moment everything would change. Finally, Christopher broke the silence, his voice tight, every syllable carefully restrained to avoid exploding. "Let me make something crystal clear," he said, his tone sharp as glass. "Today there will be no confusion about time, no mysterious illnesses, no convenient memory lapses. You will show up, you will work, and you will make me look competent in front of my boss. Do you understand me?" "I understand completely," I replied, keeping my tone subdued, appropriately submissive. My words floated calm and steady, masking the storm beneath. Christopher flicked me a sharp glance, suspicion in his eyes. "Do you? Because yesterday's little stunt nearly cost me my job." Leonard was furious, asking pointed questions about my judgment, about why I would vouch for someone so unreliable. He practically accused me of being blind. His grip tightened on the wheel. "I had to beg him to give you another chance." "Poor Leonard," I murmured softly, almost to myself, though I knew Christopher could hear me. I let the words linger, a subtle barb. He must have been very confused. After all, it isn't every day a man has to wonder why his business partner's son is bending over backward to hire his own father as menial labor. I turned my gaze back to the passing streets, the faintest smile ghosting my lips. The performance was only beginning. "And no more tricks, because I know you too well," Christopher continued, his voice gaining momentum, as though he were giving a speech to subordinates rather than speaking to his father. "You probably think this is just another game that you can twist and manipulate the situation to get your way. But those days are over. From now on, I'm the one in control." I allowed myself a faint smile, letting just a trace of quiet confidence slip into my tone. "Don't worry, son. Today, everything will be different." Christopher shot me a sharp glance, suspicion flickering across his face. Something in my voice didn't fit the narrative he had built for himself. "Different. "What's that supposed to mean?" he asked, his tone tight. "It means I understand the situation far better now," I said carefully, each word deliberate. "Sometimes it just takes time for things to become clear." At that very moment, the Whitmore Industries building came into view. A towering structure of steel and glass, sleek and commanding, standing as a monument to 25 years of relentless growth from Leonard's cramped garage to a multi-million-dollar empire. Christopher's grip tightened on the steering wheel as he stared at it, a mixture of pride and unease in his eyes. He had driven past this building countless times, never realizing that his own father had been instrumental in making it possible. "There it is," Christopher said. Finally, his voice colored with both triumph and nerves. 3,000 employees, a multi-million-dollar operation. "This is where real men work, Dad. This is what success really looks like." "Indeed," I replied softly, my gaze fixed on the glittering facade. Deep inside, a slow smile spread. "And today you'll discover just how much success your family has truly built." The car rolled into the parking lot, stopping close to the main entrance. Christopher turned off the engine, but his hands trembled slightly against the steering wheel. Whether it was anger, anxiety, or fear creeping in, I couldn't quite tell. He turned to me, his eyes burning with a desperate intensity. "Remember this," he said, voice heavy with authority. "No matter what happens in there, you follow my lead. I'll do the talking. You stay quiet, respectful, grateful for the opportunity." Of course, I answered smoothly, hiding the irony of being lectured on how to behave inside a company that had once been mine. Christopher drew a deep breath as if to summon courage, then pushed open his door. He waited stiffly on the sidewalk as I stepped out, adjusting the janitor's uniform. He had forced me to wear a costume for the final act of a play he didn't realize was nearly over. Together we walked toward the gleaming glass doors. They opened with a soft whoosh, revealing the marble lobby that had not seen my footsteps in months. Today it would serve as the stage for the last scene of our family's long-brewing drama. Christopher strode forward with forced confidence, nodding briskly to the security guard. The guard returned the gesture, no questions asked. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had been the one who designed these very security measures years ago, and now they ushered me back inside without hesitation. "Stay close. Stay quiet," Christopher muttered under his breath, not bothering to glance back. "I'll handle everything." The corridor buzzed with the hum of morning activity, employees balancing coffee cups, exchanging quick words about meetings and projects. Familiar faces passed us by, though none seemed to notice the elderly man in a janitor's uniform trailing behind a nervous, mid-level manager. Christopher abruptly stopped at a supply closet, pulling out a mop and a bucket. He shoved them into my hands with a look of grim satisfaction, as though the act itself confirmed his control. "Here," he ordered. "Hold these. When Leonard sees you, it needs to look authentic." I wrapped my fingers around the mop handle, nodding silently. But in my eyes there was a flicker of something Christopher had never seen before. A glimmer of quiet power, the kind that comes only when the truth is moments away from shattering the lies. In less than 5 minutes, Christopher Cook would finally learn who his father really was. I accepted the mop and bucket without a word, though inwardly I almost laughed at the absurd theater of it all. Christopher truly believed he was orchestrating the grand finale of his little performance. He had no idea that the curtain was about to rise on an entirely different play. Around us, Whitmore Industries buzzed with the rhythm of corporate life. Analysts pored over reports, executives debated strategy, assistants carried files from office to office. Every step, every decision, every dollar earned in this place was a ripple of the investment I had made decades ago. My silent legacy was written into the very walls, though no one here knew it yet. "There he is," Christopher breathed beside me, his voice tightening with excitement. He adjusted his tie nervously, straightened his posture, and forced on the look of a polished, professional manager. At the far end of the corridor, Leonard Whitmore appeared. Even from a distance, Leonard commanded respect. At 64, his silver hair gleamed under the recessed lighting, his suit was tailored to perfection, and he walked with the steady assurance of a man who had built an empire with his own hands. A tablet rested in his grasp, his eyes scanning data with unwavering focus as he made his morning rounds through the building he had shepherded into greatness. "Mr. Whitmore," Christopher called out, raising his voice with eager enthusiasm. "Perfect timing, sir." Leonard looked up, momentarily distracted, before directing his attention toward Christopher. His expression was polite, professional, the kind he reserved for countless middle managers. His eyes passed over me, just a routine glance at the elderly janitor trailing behind, and then he stopped. The pause was palpable. Leonard's steps slowed, his eyes narrowing as recognition sparked. "Christopher," he said slowly, his voice edged with confusion. "You brought him here." Christopher's chest swelled with self-satisfaction. He squared his shoulders as if presenting a prize solution. "Yes, sir," he said with pride. "I solved our staffing problem and my family problem at the same time. This is my father, the janitor." The words landed in the corridor like a gauntlet thrown at fate itself. Conversations continued around us, phones rang, footsteps echoed, but in that small circle of tension, time seemed to freeze. I saw it happen, the transformation on Leonard's face. First came recognition, a flicker of memory. Then disbelief, his mouth tightening, his eyes hardening as the truth settled. And finally fury, a cold, searing fury that seemed to drop the temperature of the hallway by 10 degrees. "Christopher," Leonard said, his voice low, controlled, and more dangerous than a shout. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Christopher faltered. For the first time that morning, uncertainty crept into his voice. "Sir, you brought Douglas Cook," Leonard said, his voice sharpening like steel, "one of the largest shareholders of this company, into this building with a mop in his hands. And you're standing here proud of yourself." The blood drained from Christopher's face so fast I thought he might collapse. His jaw moved soundlessly, his lips parting like a fish gasping for oxygen. That's impossible," he whispered, trembling. "Impossible," Leonard's voice thundered, now echoing through the corridor. "25 years ago, your father invested $500,000 in my startup. Without him, there would be no Whitmore Industries. Without him, there would be no building, no employees, no empire. And certainly," his voice cut sharper, "no job for you to lose. Which you just did." I don't understand," Christopher stammered, but his words collapsed under the weight of the moment. "Then let me make it simple." Leonard's voice sliced through the silence like a blade. "You're fired, effective immediately." The declaration rippled through the hall. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. Employees froze mid-step. The drama that had been invisible seconds ago was now the center of gravity in the building. Christopher's briefcase slipped from his trembling hands, crashing to the marble floor with a crack that echoed through the hush. Papers spilled across the polished surface, fluttering like the remains of his shredded pride. Leonard's anger softened as he turned to me. The cold fury melted into genuine concern, his tone shifting entirely. "Douglas," he said, stepping closer. "My friend, what on earth is going on here?" I set the mop aside with quiet finality, straightening to my full height. Gone was the stooped, submissive posture I had worn like a costume. My back was strong, my eyes steady, my voice clear, with the authority and intelligence I had hidden for days. "Leonard," I said, meeting his gaze without hesitation, "I think it's time we had a private conversation. In your office." He nodded instantly, as though my words carried a weight far greater than Christopher had ever commanded. Leonard's executive office awaited us, a space of prestige and triumph. Mahogany furniture polished to a mirror shine, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Portland skyline like a living painting, walls adorned with awards photographs and the history of 25 years of unbroken success. But today, that office would witness something far greater than corporate strategy. Today, it would become the room where truth surfaced, lies shattered, and destinies changed forever. As we stepped into Leonard's executive office, I felt an overwhelming wave of memories crash over me. The room hadn't changed much since the early days. The polished mahogany desk still gleamed under the soft light. The floor-to-ceiling windows still offered that commanding view of Portland's skyline, and the walls still carried the story of our journey. Photographs framed in understated elegance depicted milestone after milestone. Leonard and I shaking hands at our first major contract, signing, celebrating a product launch, standing side by side in front of the factory we'd built, from nothing but faith and ambition. Christopher's eyes darted to those photographs, his mind unable to process what he was seeing. Each picture was a silent betrayal of the narrative he had always believed, that his father had been nothing more than an ordinary man scraping by with low-paying jobs. His face remained ghostly pale from the revelation in the corridor. like a man walking through a nightmare he couldn't wake from. He stumbled into the room and dropped into a leather chair without invitation. His posture collapsed. He looked small, fragile, staring at his own trembling hands as though they no longer belonged to him. "Douglas, please sit." Leonard said, his tone softer now, gesturing toward the familiar chair across from his desk, the chair where I had spent countless hours over the years shaping the direction of this very company. I sat down slowly, feeling the heavy weight of decades of silence, deception, and humility lifting from my shoulders at last. Leonard's gaze shifted sharply toward Christopher, his voice firm with incredulity. "Can someone explain to me why my business partner, the man who helped build this empire brick by brick, was just introduced to me as a janitor by his own son?" I drew a steady breath before answering. "Leonard, my family has been under the impression that I've been financially dependent on them. They've been rather uncharitable in their assessment of my worth." Uncharitable. Leonard's tone cracked like a whip. His eyes narrowed at Christopher, who flinched under the weight of his words. "Christopher, your father owns 37% of this company. 37%. He has been quietly drawing dividends for decades, not because he needed to flaunt wealth, but because that's what investments yield." "What exactly did you think he did for a living?" Christopher's voice emerged in a strangled whisper, his lips trembling. I thought he did factory work, manual labor. I thought he was poor." Poor Leonard barked out a laugh, though there was no trace of humor in it. The sound was harsh, bitter, like broken glass. "Your father could buy and sell half of Portland's business district without blinking. He chose modesty. He chose humility. He chose to let you believe he was struggling, and apparently he even chose to let you treat him like a burden." The silence that followed was deafening. The truth, 25 years of sacrifice and hidden success, hung between us like a storm cloud finally breaking open. Through the wide windows, the city stretched out before me, a city I had helped Leonard conquer when I signed that first $500,000 investment check. Christopher's voice cracked as he finally looked at me directly, desperation clouding his eyes. "But why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because I needed to know," I replied, my words calm but unyielding. "I needed to see what kind of man you would become, without the shadow of wealth guiding you. I wanted to know if you'd honor your father for who he was, not for what he owned." My gaze hardened. And now I have my answer. Leonard leaned back in his chair, his expression carved with open disdain. "So let me see if I have this straight. Your father retires after a lifetime of quiet success, and your response, your brilliant solution, is to force him into menial labor, to humiliate him. We couldn't afford," Christopher began weakly. "You couldn't afford." Leonard's voice rose like a thunderclap, cutting him off. "Your father has been financing you your entire adult life, college tuition, your wedding, the down payment for your house, all of it, money from his share of this company's profits. And how do you repay that generosity?" His eyes narrowed, searing Christopher with righteous fury. "By threatening to dump him in a nursing home like discarded furniture." Christopher's face collapsed, his composure shattering completely. He looked broken, hollowed out as the enormity of his betrayal finally sank in. His lips trembled, his words barely audible. I didn't know. Nobody told me." I leaned forward, my voice low, steady, but cutting deeper than any shout could. "Nobody told you to be decent to your father either. Nobody told you to treat the man who raised you with basic human respect," I said, my voice low but edged with steel. "That should have come naturally. No one should have to teach their own child how to honor the hands that fed them." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Christopher sat frozen, his face pale and hollow, like a man watching the ruins of his own arrogance crumble around him. Leonard rose slowly from his chair, his movements deliberate, his gaze distant. He walked to the window that overlooked the parking lot, the late afternoon sun spilling golden light across the office. For a moment, his reflection in the glass seemed to study the world outside the cars, the people, the hum of life that went on, unaware of the storm that had just broken in this room. Finally, he turned back to me. His voice carried the calm authority of a man who had made 1,000 decisions that shaped lives. "Douglas, what do you want me to do about this situation?" I stood as well, feeling stronger, taller than I had in years. The weight of decades of being underestimated, dismissed, treated as less than I was, had fallen away. My answer came without hesitation. Nothing that hasn't already been done. Justice has been served. Christopher stirred confusion flashing across his face. I continued steady and unwavering. His employment here is already terminated, as you've announced. His wife faces criminal charges for embezzlement at her company, though that's another matter entirely. Christopher's head snapped up, shock cutting through his despair. You knew about Lily. I met his gaze, my expression unflinching. I know about everything, son. I always have. The words struck like a hammer. Christopher's shoulders sagged, his last defense stripped away. He was no longer the arrogant man who had dismissed me as a burden, but a boy lost in the ruins of his own choices. The room fell into silence again, broken only by the faint hum of telephones and footsteps from the offices below. Life, business, progress, all of it continued indifferent to the reckoning that had taken place here. The real question now, I said, my tone quieter though it carried even more weight, is what you're going to do with this knowledge. What kind of man you'll choose to be now that the truth is laid bare. Christopher lowered his head. For the first time, he had no reply. Leonard stepped forward, his footsteps echoing against the polished wood floor. He came to stand beside me, placing a firm hand on my shoulder. His voice was warm but resolute. Douglas, you're always welcome here. This company, it's as much yours as it is mine. It always has been. I felt a surge of gratitude tempered by a quiet certainty. I turned to him, a small smile forming. Thank you, Leonard. But I think it's time I finally retired properly this time, on my own terms. My eyes shifted back to Christopher, who sat slumped in the chair, his lips trembling as though searching for words that refused to come. I studied him for a long moment before speaking. Perhaps this experience will teach you something about respect, about humility, and about the difference between being poor and choosing to live simply. Christopher opened his mouth, but nothing came. No apology, no plea, no explanation. Only silence. There were no words that could mend what had been broken, no excuses that could erase the truth. Leonard moved to the door and held it open for me, the gesture filled with a quiet dignity that felt like closure. Justice has been restored, he said simply. Indeed, I replied, my voice steady. And it had. After days of humiliation, of threats of being made to feel like less than I was, I now stood in the place I truly belonged, not as a burden, not as a man surviving on charity, but as Douglas Cook. Businessman, partner, a man who had earned his place and reclaimed his dignity. The week of my retirement had ended exactly as it should have, with the truth revealed, respect restored, and justice finally irrevocably served. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel D-Daily Stories, and share your impressions in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.